So today we are starting from a start the ignition system. So ignition system of automobile. Now first come what is the ignition system? The system in an internal combustion engine that produces the spark to ignite the mixture of fuel and air includes the system in the internal combustion that is IC engine which is used to spark or ignite the fuel and air mixture which is footed in the cylinder of IC engine is called as ignition system. So the component of ignition system it includes like battery, ignition coil, distributor, spark plug and associated switches and wiring with it. So what are the various functions of ignition system? It produces nearly 30,000 volt spark across the spark plug. It distributes high voltage spark to each spark plug in correct sequence. So it also ignition system has the function of timing the spark so it occurs as piston is nearing top dead center TDC. It varies the spark timing with load, speed and other conditions. So these are the main functions of an ignition system. Now we are discussing what are the basic ignition system components. So the ignition system in automobile in IC engine basically includes the battery, ignition switch, ignition coil, switching device, a spark plug, and ignition system wires. These are the components of a ignition system. Now the basic ignition system is the basic ignition system is shown in the PPT. First one is component is battery. So battery supplies the power to the entire system. From the battery we go moves right down. The first component comes is the ignition switch. So the working of ignition switch is to turn engine on and off. Ignition switch is used to turn the engine on or off. Now after the ignition switch a coil is placed. The work of ignition coil which transform the voltage. We give the input of 12 volts and this ignition coil converts this 12-volt input into nearly 30,000 volts output. After that ignition coil, a switching devices which is used to triggers the ignition coil and the spark plug and wires distribute the spark. And when the high voltage current passes through the spark plug, the sparks generate which is used to ignite the fuel in the engine cylinder. Next, ignition coil. Ignition coil has the transformer. There are two sets of winding in the ignition coil, primary winding and secondary winding. And it has the iron core which is centrally mounted and it produces the magnetic field. You can see here clearly the placement and arrangement of the primary positive terminal, primary negative terminal, and secondary terminal, secondary winding, and primary winding. It is the internal structure of the ignition coil. Now, ignition system is divided into mainly three types, which is battery ignition system, Magneto ignition system, and distributorless ignition system. Now first we are going to discuss about battery ignition system. In the battery ignition system, it has a 6 or 12-volt battery charged by an engine driven generator to supply electricity, an ignition coil to increase the voltage, a device to interrupt the current from the coil, a distributor to direct current to the correct cylinder, and a spark plug projecting into each cylinder. Current goes from the battery through the primary winding of the coil, through the interrupting device, and back to the battery. The primary winding consists of the battery, ammeter, ignition switch, primary coil winding, capacitor, and breaking point. The function of these components are battery. Battery is used in this battery ignition system to provide the power to run the system. All the power supply is provided by the battery itself. Now the ignition switch, it allows driver to turn the system on or off. Primary coil, primary coil, primary coil produces magnetic field to create the high voltage in the secondary coil. So the role of primary coil is to produce production of magnetic field to create the high voltage in the secondary coil. Now the breaker point, a mechanical switch is used as a breaker point that acts as the triggering mechanism. Capacitor, it protects the point from burning out. Capacitor is used in the system to protect from the burning out of the system components. Now we are going to discuss the secondary circuit. So what is the role of secondary circuit in the battery ignition system? The secondary circuit converts magnetic induction into the high voltage electricity which jumps across the spark plug gap and firing the mixture at the right time. Now the function of this secondary circuit is, the first is the secondary coil. The secondary coil, it is the part of the coil that creates the high voltage electricity. So in the battery ignition system, secondary coil is used to create the high voltage electricity. Then comes to rotor. It spins around the top of the distributor shaft and distributes the spark to the right spark plug. Now comes to a spark plug. So spark plug take the electricity from the wires and i- give it an air gap in the combustion chamber to jump across the light, the mixture. These are the components of the secondary coil of battery ignition system. You can have the loop of the battery ignition system arrangement. Now in this system, from battery the power goes to a starting switch. When the starting switch is on, the induction coil works, and this induction coil, by the help of primary coil, laminated core, and secondary coil, produces a high voltage current. That high voltage current is sent to the distributor. The role of the distributor is to supply the high voltage which comes from the ignition coil to the spark plug. As you know, if your vehicle is 4 cylinder, 3 cylinder, then each cylinder has an individual spark plug. So there is a firing order. In the firing order, the distributor will supply one by the spark one by one voltage in the each spark plug, so it will process the one by one firing of each the cylinder of an IC engine. Now we are going to discuss about the Magneto ignition system. The magneto ignition system, it is the simplest form of a spark ignition which is using a magneto. An ignition magneto or high tension magneto is a magneto that provides current for the ignition system of a spark ignition engine such as petrol engine. The engine spins a magnet inside a coil, or in the earlier designs a coil inside a fixed magnet, and also operates a contact breaker, interrupting the current and causing the voltage to be increased sufficiently to jump a small gap. The spark plug are connected directly from the magneto output. So, see in this picture, in place of battery, here the magnetic system is used, and that magnetic system is used to produce the high voltage current. The high voltage current, which is produced by the ignition coil with the help of battery in the battery ignition system, is replaced here by the magneto ignition system, in which a rotating magnet which has the two poles, south pole and north pole, is used between the fixed armature to produce the high voltage current. And that high voltage current is sent to the distributor again, and this is the same as the battery ignition system. And distributor send this high voltage current in the spark plug of the each engine. You can see in this diagram there are four spark plugs, and as per the firing order, distributor will send the high voltage current into the spark plug. And when this high voltage current will pass through the gap of the spark plug, a spark will generate, and that spark will ignite or light the air fuel mixture in the engine cylinder. You have to clear that only in the SI engine, that is in a spark ignition engine, there is need to ignite the fuel by the outer source. When the diesel engine, that is the compression ignition CI engine, there is no need to ignite the fuel by outsider. Where there a spark plug and ignition system is not required at all. So you can have the better view here how this ignition system, magneto ignition system works. You can see in the left hand side there is a power generator and the coil in which a magnet is placed, and that magnet produces, when this magnet moves between the coil, it produces the, due to electromagnetic effect, it produces the high voltage current, and that high voltage current is directly sent to the distributor, and from distributor it is sent to the spark plugs. A ignition switch is used to on and off this magneto ignition system. The condenser here, which is used to for the safeguarding of all the equipments from the high voltage sources. Now see here the pictorial view of distributor. Here, here you can see the typical distributor, how it looks like. There is cap, body, input shaft. You can see in the right hand side vacuum advance mechanism. You can see inlet pressure, vacuum chamber, digraph, adjustable plate, points. Now, if you come in the right hand side second picture, that is the centrifugal advance mechanism in which the centrifugal power is used. Now, This is the pictorial view of a spark plug. This is a spark plug. You can see in the bottom side, uh, see in the left hand side, you can see there is the four circular dots. These four circular dots are the places of the spark plug. They are the four spark plug which is used here. So this is the engine which has the four cylinder. And a spark plug, we can see from the bottom there is a gap through which a high voltage current is supplied into the spark plug. After gap, then outer electrode is used. Above that, the part is called as screw threading. Screw threading, there is a thread is used here to mount it the spark plug in the engine cylinder. Above that, a copper sealing gasket is used to provide the better sealing. That outer casing of the spark plug. Above that, hexagonal bolt is used. Above that, that is the ceramic body and cap connector, which is the cap connector through which the spark goes out to the fuel air mixture. This is the pictorial view of distributorless ignition system. You can have a look of this distributorless ignition system. So now we are going in short, we are going to discuss in short about distributorless ignition system. The principles of operation are basically no different than those for distributor equipped electronic ignition system that began appearing in American automobiles in 1972 itself. There are two obvious differences. First one, a DI system does not have a mechanical distributor. In the distributorless ignition system, there is no mechanical distributor. Most DI systems use one coil for every two spark plug. However, some systems have one coil per cylinder. For example, in BMW, one coil for one cylinder. So there is no need to use distributor because there is a particular coil for the particular spark plug. In operation, the only difference is that in distributorless system, fire all of the engine spark plugs of one crankshaft revolution, whereas the old mechanical distributor type fires all plugs every two crankshaft rotation. So in one crankshaft revolution, all the engine spark plug will be fired. But in the old distributor system, in two crankshaft revolution, the all spark plugs will be fired. On all four stroke engines equipped with or without distributors require two crankshaft revolution, that is 720-degree treble for the combustion to occur on each cylinder. On engine with an even number of cylinders, combustion occurs in half of the cylinder in the first revolution, that is 360 degree of rotation, and in the outer other half in the second half of the revolution. Each cylinder that has combustion in the first revolution has a combustion cylinder that fires 360 degree apart from it. You can have the layout of this distributorless ignition system. You can see here there is a four spark plug and ECU primary and secondary winding, primary and secondary winding. So you can clearly see here there is two coil which is used for the 4 spark plug. So there is no need to use the distributor. One by one they will supply the high voltage current in the spark plugs. So see here the more clear pictorial view. Now next point we are going to discuss contact point system. The contact point system distributor turns half engine RPM. Distributor cam, contact point condenser, point del cam angle and basis for all the system. This is the contact point distributor system. This is the contact point distributor system. There is a ignition coil and ignition coil will send. First one is the battery, you can see in the bottom of the picture. Then battery will send the power in the ignition switch. When the ignition switch will turn on, the ignition coil will act and that will generate the high voltage current. And that high voltage current will send to the distributor and that distributor can will further supply that high voltage current in the spark plug. So now, after discussing the basic of this ignition system, if some problems come in your automobile, so how to diagnose, how to solve, what is the possible solutions for that problem. So we are going to see some problems like if there is no spark out of the coil when all the system is turned on and there is you are seeing there is no spark of the coil, so what are the possible solution possible open in the ignition switch circuit. So it is possible so that your ignition switch circuit is not open, so you should open that. Second solution may be defective ignition module. So defective ignition module means there may be some components in your ignition system which is not properly functioning. If you are using the electronic ignition system, it may be possible shorted condenser. So problem is that if the weak spark plug out of the coil, problem is if the ignition coil is producing the spark but that is very weak, that is not able to ignite the fuel. So what are the solutions? Possible high resistance coil wire or a spark plug wire, because solution is that uh, high resistance coil wire or a spark plug wire, it is possible due to what can be caused if the spark plug has the weak source or weak spark is producing out of the coil, that causes maybe it is caused due to the high resistance wire which is used in the coil or the spark plug. Possible poor ground between the distributor or the module and the engine block. Next point may be engine missing. So possible defective spark plug wire. It is also possible to burn or fault a spark plug. It is also caused by the defective pickup coil. You have to also check the defective module. You should also check the poor electrical connections at the pickup coil. So this is all about the basic of ignition system. In the next lecture, we will further study about the next topic related to this ignition system. Thank you very much.